Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about a post made by Daniel Fernandez, which is a little bit of a depressing post actually. Quite a very interesting post. I think Daniel Fernandez is an English GM like myself. Also called Daniel, right? Or I'm called Danny or Daniel. You call me what you like, I don't really care. You know. But Daniel, I believe he's originally from Manchester, right? And he became a GM a few years ago. I'm not sure how long ago he became a GM, or maybe 10 years ago, or maybe it was 8 years ago. I can't remember, unfortunately. But he's one of the most recent players to become a GM in England. And Tim Wall, who's often been critical of the ECF, Tim Wall is quite a left-wing guy. Doesn't like the ECF, thinks they're an old boys club. And he's posted this comment. He said, "This cri de coeur has just been posted on Facebook by GM Daniel Fernandez. It is a sad indictment in the English chess scene that someone so talented should be thinking of quitting the game for good. Recent selection decisions on national teams and other tournaments clearly had an impact on Daniel and his fellow 20-something professionals." Yeah, so what he's referring to is that Viti Hugo was brought in, and he said that some players, I know some players have been quite vocal about the fact they don't like interesting pushback because we haven't had that so far. There were a few players brought into the women's team. I'm not sure if everyone was completely happy about that. They weren't born in this country, but I don't think that really is that relevant. If they want to be English, we have a history of bringing people in this country. We have a history of having open borders. If you look at tennis world, for example, British tennis, British athletics, we brought in players from abroad. We're now doing that in the chess team. Not everybody's happy with that. Okay? I'm not saying I'm unhappy with it. I'm saying that other people are unhappy with it. Okay? I personally don't mind it. But on the other hand, if you go back to like 2005, 2006, when I first got in the English national team, if there had been a lot of players who had been born abroad who were playing for England at the time and they were kind of forcing me out of the team, I probably wouldn't have been very happy about it. So I can understand where they're coming from. I'm now too old and too washed up to get in the England team. Like I'm weaker than I was. I'm 24-40. Back in the day I was 25-70. I'm not as good as I was. So I won't get in it. But someone like Daniel Fernandez is good enough to get in the team. He's not able to get in the team. He's very unhappy about the situation. And what he's written is chess is shit for self-esteem because you're always comparing yourself to people one rung up the hamster wheel. Yes, another DF quitting status. So he's talking about himself, Daniel Fernandez, quitting status. I've objectively had one of the best 8-month periods of my life in chess, starting at 24-80 in Cambridge in February and finishing now at 25-40 in Serbia. He's played a lot. He's played all over the world. Played in America, played in Europe, he's played in England. England is in Europe as far as I'm aware, last time I looked. I extended the speed run for as long as possible. I largely stayed off social media, focused on avoiding tilt and made conscious choices that I wanted in my life. Got rid of Gormally, both chess-wise and otherwise. I proved that I wasn't completely washed up, not least to myself, and for sure there were other people also thinking about my potential during this time. Yes, I failed at some critical moments. I didn't put away Hans Niemann in the National Open. I didn't make a respectable stab at the British in the final rounds, and I didn't make it to European teams. Weird though that selection was, but story for another day. However, this is where I disagree, because I think a lot of this comes from the fact that he wasn't selected. Now, I've gone through this before. I don't really want to go over it again. I feel like the 5 players we have are excellent players. They're really good fit for the team. I don't want to put more pressure on people already there, right? They're already under enough pressure. Let's not talk about it anymore. However, I think Daniel is absolutely right. I think he had a very good case for being selected, as did Amit Gartzi as well. And 2 players who played really excellent chess over the last few months. So they could potentially, I think they've really separated themselves from the rest of the pack. And they're probably unlucky in the sense, certainly unlucky in the sense that it's now a 5-board situation for teams. Going back in the day, it would have been 6 boards. So one of them would definitely have got in. However, further down the line, they're going to possibly struggle to get back in the team, get into the team anyway. I don't think got in the team before, they're going to struggle to get in the team because the fact that Gawain will come back in. When Sheras Royal improves, he's probably going to potentially be selected because he's a younger player, right? And we've already seen there's an emphasis on selecting younger players. Malcolm likes to select younger players, which is fair enough. He likes to, if there's a choice between somebody who's 35 and somebody who's 25 and they're more or less the same rating, Malcolm's going to go for the 25-year-old, right? Because he feels he's invested in long-term potential. However, I think Daniel has a fair point because he played a lot over the last year and he wasn't selected. So you're then getting discouraged. He's then getting discouraged because he feels like he wasn't given a fair crack of the whip. There's a faceless committee team that decides who gets selected. I say faceless, these are made up of real people, right? People like Jonathan Parker, who I've played before, a very good player actually. Doesn't play anymore, got a very good job in the city. Made gazillions, but he's still obviously got a good knowledge of chess, right? But yeah, I think the fact that there was no kind of communication, right? I think what you want as a younger player like Daniel, you'd like to have that communication. Someone to ring you up and say, look, sorry, we didn't put you in the team this time, but this is why, you do this in future, we're going to select you. But there was no communication on that level, as far as I'm aware. And I think that's kind of where he kind of feels a little bit kind of cast out, right? It's almost like, everything he did was irrelevant. He goes on to say, he has it always comes back to his clear freeway choice, descended to Gormally lalic pit of despair, Glapod. Sorry, it could be Gladpod or whatever, but so that's interesting. Yeah, he's also referring to, as well as to myself, he's referring to Bogdan Lalic, right? I don't know if he's also referring to this thing in Star Wars where you had this Sarlacc monster, I believe in the sand pits or something, sand pits of Sarlacc. And Boba Fett, the bounty hunter, was employed by the Empire and specifically by Darth Vader to hunt down Han Solo, which he did. There was a big fight, right? It was Jabba the Hutt. It was probably based on me, right? It was Luke Skywalker, probably based on Luke McShane. It was Daniel Fernandez, who's played by Boba Fett, who ends up falling into the pit of despair and consumed slowly over 1,000 years by this monster. I used to love those films when I was younger. Star Wars, the first Star Wars came out in 1977. That was a year after I was born. I used to idolise Luke Skywalker. He's played by Mark Hamill in the films. There's also, of course, Harrison Ford played Han Solo, and Princess Leia was played by Carrie Fisher. Sadly died. I think he's a bit of a drug addict. 1980 was Empire Strikes Back. It's directed by Irving Kershner. Good quiz question. You may or may not know this. Who directed the 1983 film Return of the Jedi, where this scene with the Sarlacc monster, or whatever it was called? Who directed that film? It's not a very well-known question, so I'd be interested to see your comments below. Please don't Google it. His other potential possible things are quit chess for real or go into the tank, work both on chess and other things and give it another shot in a few months. Yeah, I think he's been a bit negative here. I think, coming from someone who's often very negative, in my opinion, Daniel should carry on playing chess. He's got to his highest ever rating probably, 25-40. It'd be a shame to quit now. If he quit now, he would never know what he could have achieved. Right? There's probably a lot of chess professionals out there who ended up getting jobs and kind of feel the same way. What could I have achieved if I'd carried on? In my opinion, given that FIDE are now changing the rules on rating and they're adding points to people rated below 2,000, it could well be that 25-40 in a few months' time or a couple of years' time will be worth 25-80. We've clearly seen deflation in the system. 25-40 now, it's probably worth 26-20 15 years ago, right? I don't know if that's true or not. You'd have to do a mathematical survey, but He's certainly worth more than 2540. I'd say at least 2580. So if he then got to 2580, it's then a small jump to 2600. I certainly think he's capable of getting to 2600 in the future, right? And as he stated below in some of the replies, 2600, you know, we haven't had an English player get to over 2600 in 15 years. This is the problem that we have now. I think like English chess has probably gone down on the slide a little bit because of the fact that, in my opinion, for a few reasons, I think there's a few reasons why English chess is on the decline, and why we haven't had any players break 2600 coming through since the likes of Gawain Jones, David Howe. I think there's been a lack of investment in the game. There's been a lack of money put into the game. You know, what is the motivation to become a chess professional when you look at the prizes in English chess? A typical weekender, the first prize might be £400. You go back, say, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, the prize would have been the same, but the expenses were a lot less. So there's no incentive to become a professional chess player, in my opinion. That is why you see other people going into other jobs. So there's been a lack of investment in the game. We have had this £1 million from the government. But the problem is that £1 million will go into other things. It won't necessarily help someone like Daniel. It might help him a little bit, but you know, we remain to see whether it will help him. It might just go, if he just goes into players who play in the England team and they're getting money, how's it going to help someone like myself? Well, it's different for me. I'm like a washed up GM. I shouldn't expect anything. But how's it going to help someone like Daniel, who is, you know, potentially on the verge of that team? It's not necessarily going to help him, right? If he's just going to players who are specifically in an England team. And I personally don't agree with that. I think that a lot of those players are already financially secure. What is the point of giving them more money? You should really be giving people like Daniel, who's on the rise, who should, you know, who could potentially get in that team. You should give him money as well. So that would be my argument. Yeah, so it's a very difficult situation to resolve. It's not an easy situation. In my opinion, I think he should give it a go for like 2 or 3 years, get to his early 30s, and then decide what he wants to do. Does he want to carry on with the chess? If he's not made any progress past 25-40, the problem with chess is it's a great career in some ways. I think, you know, it's a great career in the sense you're doing something which is mentally stimulating. You have freedom in the sense that you don't have to worry about a boss that's going to, you know, boss you around, tell you what to do. You also get to travel a lot. So there's a lot of upsides to being a professional chess player. But there's also downsides. That's why I think when he's talking about the Gormally lalic bit of despair, is the downside is there's a lack of money in chess. And I kind of regret when I was in my early 30s and I had this experience of getting in the Olympiad team in Turin. It didn't work out for me. It was a disaster. At that point, I think I should have sat down and had a good rethink and think about what I wanted to do in my life. Instead, I kind of limped on as a chess player, and my heart wasn't really in it at that point. And that was the moment where I was in my early 30s, was still full of energy, still full of beans, and I could have really put my head down and really retrained and done something else. And I didn't. And because I didn't do that, I'm now in this situation where I'm 47, I'm older, I'm kind of embittered about stuff. And I think that's what he's kind of referring to in this article, that he doesn't want to get into that state, right? I totally agree with him. And I wish that I'd kind of gone back. You know, if I could get in a time machine now, I'd go back. But I'm now thinking of doing other stuff. I did do stuff like I got a job working in a bookshop. Didn't work out. I got a certificate of college. I did a counselling course. I got a level 2 certificate, but I didn't carry on doing that. I wish I'd done more in that area. I should, you know, I feel like the last 17 years of my life have effectively been wasted. I got to a decent level in chess, I didn't kick on, and I should have restructured at that point. Instead, I've effectively, stayed in status quo, and I've not really improved my life situation. That's the way I look at it. So I feel like he's got enough time, but there is a danger that you kind of, it's easy for me to say you stop when you're 30, but he might carry on and get to 30, and then he might end up in a similar situation to me. On the other hand, you also need to think about, it seems to me from this post, that he's not sure what else he wants to do other than chess. I think that's the other thing that I'm getting from this post. So he needs to have a very good think about what he wants to do other than chess. Because that was my problem as well. I wasn't sure what else to do other than chess, and that still remains the case, right? I'm not sure what else to do. I tried the counselling, didn't really work out. I tried the bookshop, didn't really work out. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I feel like with chess, it's just a terrible career decision because the money is so bad, and I regret kind of getting into chess now. I don't regret playing it in the first place, but I kind of regret taking it up as a career. But as I said, when I got to 30 odd, I should have then restructured because I was making no progress in life and I was going backwards, and I didn't restructure. Now I'm older and I've probably got less energy to go and do other stuff, and so maybe I'm now stuck in this kind of being morbidly angry about everything, and how everything's just going downhill and everything's going to end in doom and disaster. I know exactly what he means. So very interesting post there by Daniel Fernandez, what he's talking about there. And I'm interested to see what comes of this. In my opinion, as far as the England team is concerned, there should be a qualification spot, or at least one, I'd say 2 qualification spots for the England chess team. And I think that for several reasons. I think firstly, that would make it more competitive. It would make it more interesting. I was watching the golf a few weeks ago, and there was this qualification spot for the Ryder Cup. Adrian Meronk didn't get in the team. He almost got in on points, but he didn't get in on points. People thought he should have been selected. He wasn't selected. And he was very angry about that. A little bit like what Daniel feels has kind of been cast aside, right? Not been given a fair crack of the whip. Now, but at least with that, there was like a fair qualification process. If you had enough points, you get in. The problem I think with the England team is it's very arbitrary who gets selected, who doesn't. There's a selection committee, but there's no open qualification spot. What I would do is make the British Championships and the English Championships, the highest ranked player over those 2 tournaments would then get in to play for the England team. I think that possibly other countries do a qualification process as well in terms of tournaments, and I think we should do that in this country. And I think that would make it a more interesting and exciting, and then everybody would feel like they get a fair crack of the whip, right? Because at the moment, there's no motivation to even play those tournaments. There were very few GMs at the British Championships. There were very few GMs or high-rated players at the English Championships, right? If you had a qualification spot available for the Olympiad team or the European teams championships in those events, and if you can't play them, tough, but it would motivate people to play in those events, right? And if you can't play them, tough luck. I would actually keep 2 spots open, and if that leads to a weaker England team, well, so be it. You could get somebody who's had 2 great events, who's rated at 23.30. They've had 2 great events, and they finished above somebody who's rated 25.80 or 26.40. Well, those are the rules. Tough luck. Put in a 23.30. If that leads to a worse performance, so be it. But I think that would be a way to kind of get rid of this allegations of bias. But like I say, I don't want to talk too much about the England team because I feel like the 5 players we've got are really good, excellent players. And I feel like there's enough pressure on them at the moment. I think what Daniel is really talking about in this post is really about his kind of lack of commitment, or feels like, sense of despair about being a chess professional, doing, jump through his hoops, having this amazing run. He's gained 60 points. He's gone against the tide of deflation, and he doesn't feel there's been any reward at the end of it. And I completely understand where he's coming from. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Interesting to see if someone like Daniel gets better invites now that he is higher rated. There is also a motivation to get from 2480 to 2540, but does 2540 necessarily getting you any better invites than it does if you're 2480? I find now if I email tournaments, I get ignored, right? But I'm only 2440. Why should they? The 2440 GMs are 2 a penny now, right? In European tournaments. Why should I get a reply? But if someone like Daniel gets to 2540 and he finds his life doesn't change, well, yeah, I felt the same. I got to 2570. Did my life change in any way? No, it didn't. I didn't get any money for being 2570. I didn't suddenly get like £100,000 landing in my account for being 2570. If I got to 2670, would that improve my life? Probably not. If I got to 2770, then yes. If I got to 2770, I'd start to get invites to tournaments like Vikanze. I'd start to get invites to tournaments like the Grand Swiss. And people would worship me. They'd say, oh, that Gormally guy's so great. It'd be all these Reddit posts. Gormally's done this, Gormally's done that. What a wonderful player. Hang on, he's 47. How come he's improved that much? It's that little pocket Fritz that he's been carrying around. It's been helping him out. He's done a Rousis, right? But, there's a clear thing there. You get to... But on the other hand, I would say this, is that I think that... Sorry to keep going off on a tangent. I keep going on these kind of mental kind of things. But I do think that players like myself... I probably shouldn't categorise myself with Daniel, but I think, I would say lower rated GMs also lower rated than, say, 2700 plus GMs. I think in a way we're probably in a better situation in a way than, say, 2700 plus GM, in the sense there's probably more improvement to come, right? We know less about chess. I feel like once you get to that level, if you get to like Magnus level, you probably know everything about chess. I think that's kind of why he was not everything about chess, but it's kind of hard to improve at that level. I think that's kind of why he wanted to quit that World Championship cycle, because there was so much work put in terms of, you're having to learn all these computer-like variations at a lower level. There's a little bit more maneuver, right? There's kind of you're more climbing the ladder, so to speak. Once you get to that certain level, there's not much more to come. So yeah, that's kind of my comments on this Fernandez situation which is developing. Again, let's put it into perspective. It's only a chess game. We're seeing these shocking news coming out of Israel. People dying in Israel. Also the counter-attack in Palestine. That's an unfolding situation. That's a real-life situation. It's a very sad situation. We're talking about a chess game where people are shuffling pieces around the board. How serious can it be, right? It's not very serious. This British chess has got pictures of Sabrina here. Sabrina made recent allegations. She's hard at fault. She's a very clever girl, actually, Sabrina. She's got an IQ, very high IQ. And she's made recent allegations about people in the British chess scene. Fortunately, one of them wasn't me. I hope not yet, anyway. Not, that's to come, right? But yeah, so that's my comments about the Fernandez story, and I'm very interested to see any more. But my advice to Daniel is, my fellow GM, English GM called Daniel. It's also Danny King, by the way. Might be another Daniel I've probably forgotten about as well. Not really, but my fellow Daniel GM, I would say carry on for another 3 or 4 years. I feel like you can panic in these situations. He's clearly made progress. People will have noticed this. I feel there should have been more communication, but he's clearly made progress. If he carries on, if he quits now, he's saying go into the tank, work both on chess and other things, and give it another shot in a few months. I don't think he needs to go in the tank. I think he needs to keep doing what he's doing. Don't come back in a few months. Keep playing now. You know, prove, you know, this is my motivation myself. I feel like I want to prove that I'm better than other people, right? People about my level. I'm sure Daniel feels the same. I feel like he thinks he's better than Ravi Haria. He's better than Amit Gartsi. And I'm sure they think the same. They think that they're better than he is, right? Prove it, you know, go out there and prove it, right? Use that as your motivation. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I'll be interested to see your comments below. And also, what was that question again? Who directed the film Return of the Jedi? It was actually a Welsh director called Richard Marquand. The reason I learned this is I read a biography by a guy called Joe Estevez, who was a very good writer, actually. Very punchy writer, right? You know, he just got straight to the point. He was a very good writer. He was a screenwriter on the films Basic Instinct, Jagged Edge, Showgirls. He was associated with this director who directed RoboCop and Basic Instinct, Paul Verhoeven, who was a Dutch guy. And Richard Marquand was a very good friend of his, and he died of a stroke quite early in his life. Like, he was like early 50s or something like that, late 40s. He suddenly died of a stroke. But he directed Return of the Jedi. It was George Lucas. Obviously, this whole Star Wars thing was a George Lucas invention, right? And he was the first director of Star Wars in the first film, which was what was the first Star Wars film? What was it called again? A New Hope. Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, right? So it was actually number 4 was the first one. And then they came back with like Attack of the Clones, you know, all these other kind of films, right? You know, like Return of the Sith or whatever it's called, I can't remember. But yeah, the original ones were the best ones. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the Fernandez. Please leave your comments below. Please subscribe, like the video, blah, blah, blah. And there'll be more controversial. I'm like the Tim Wall of YouTube, right? I'm coming for you, ECF. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you, Malcolm. I'm only kidding. I love Malcolm. Malcolm's a great guy. He's put a lot into English chess. Let's not lose sight of that. Probably the hardest worker in English chess. He's put a lot into English chess. It should be stated as well, you know. So, you know, when we talk about this, he's put, you know, and I think he does have British chess at his heart. But I think we don't want to cast aside people like Fernandez.